In this part, we will cover how we can use DNS exercises to help our runners to prep for running session and running training. Running nowadays, it's very popular in 2 or 3 decades. Is being used for condition training for recreational runners, but also for athletic populations. And there are also many injuries. Very frequent injuries are plantar fasciitis, Achilles pain, knee pain, or hamstring strain. Frequently, the site of pain is not actual cause, but consequence of either lack of stability or overload of the soft tissue which exceed its capacity. First exercise I would like to show with Natalie is a 3 months position supine, when we will work on the trunk and pelvis stability as very much the preparation of our muscles, how well can be coordinated for running session. So Natalie, please lift your legs. The knees are shoulder width, heels are higher than the knees. We initially start to create stabilization, coactivation of the trunk muscles via respiration, which is very useful. So please, Natalie, put your hands around your abdominal wall, thumbs behind, fingers in the front. We make sure the chest is resting on a table, and also the pelvis is rested on a sacrum. There is not any arch at the TL junction. And now with the respiration, we increase the pressure towards the abdominal wall and the abdominal working eccentrically. So now we will stimulate that abdominals and back muscles with coordination with diaphragm and pelvic muscles. And now we can load the system with the activity of lower extremities. So Natalie, now please move one leg into hip extension, put heel on the floor, and then bring the leg back to the initial position. And then we switch the legs. We can apply as many repetitions as the patient or athlete is able to maintain the chest, pelvis, and abdominal back muscles coordination. We can also increase speed, so then the frequency, the cadency might increase, as we in running also need to use certain cadency for lower extremities and muscles to work with coactivation of our trunk muscles. Well done. This exercise is very useful for a runner who is complaining of hamstring strain. Hamstring is very important for runner in all part of running cycle, and the strains might be also secondary to low back instability, low back overload. And in this exercise we will work on the lumbar spine stability, plus we will work on the hamstrings eccentric coactivity and strength which is very neat for runners. Natalie, please go on a quadruped position initially, with the hands underneath the shoulders, shoulder width, knees in line with the wrist, and also feet in line of the knees. So initial position is a quadruped. We make sure the chest and pelvis is aligned. We visualize the lines of diaphragm and pelvic floor is being parallel. We start the coactivation of abdominal back muscles with respiration. So we cue our client or athlete to inhale as far as the lower abdominal wall by maintaining the TL junction straight. And now we cue the client to lift the knees and pelvis, with the pelvis being higher than the shoulders, back nicely straight, shoulders being attached to the rib cage. And in such a position, we create again the inhalation and intramural pressure towards the lower groin, which stabilizing the LS junction. And again, we will use the lower extremity movement to make this stability with the hip muscles to be working. So Natalie, please lift one leg into extension. Only isolated motion in a hip joint into extension, and then isolated motion in a hip joint as far as we can bend the hip without coupled movement with the lumbar spine. And again, into extension. So make sure the TL junction is not dropping. And one more time into the flexion. and we can combine the motion and hip joint extension, and then shift of whole body forward while we moving the hip joint and maximal flexion. And same back up, and same forward. Very good, thank you, well done. Again, the number of repetitions depend on ability of our client and athlete maintain the stable core, stable lumbar spine. Thank you, Natalie. Following exercise is very useful for runners who are suffering from ITB pain, which is the sharp pain on lateral knee, usually during a swing phase of the running cycle. In this case, that the overload lateral knee depend on lack of stability of the hip joint when the gluteus muscles, gluteus medius, external rotators, and gluteus maximus are working hard and they are inserted to ITB and overloading the knee. In this case, we can use so-called oblique sit to work on that muscles in lengthening and eccentric activity and prepare these muscles for running cycle. So Natalie, please, we start in a sitting position with the arms abducted to 90 degrees. You lean sideways, you put your hand on the floor, and legs differentiate when one leg is an abduction and external rotation, other leg in extension and slight internal rotation. In such a position, we first make sure that the chest and pelvis are aligned, so we have good position for muscles, stability of the pelvis and lumbar spine. Then we continue with the rotation of the pelvis in order to load the knee. When there is adequate lengthening and stretch over the glute muscles and external rotators, now we cue the client or athlete to load the knee, lift from the pelvis towards the knee, and experience the lengthening and activity of the glute muscles and external rotators in that eccentric coactivity. And we go back. We can vary the motion or exercise by different position of the hand. When we place the hand in front of the knee, then with the pelvis rotation, we lengthen different portion, different fibers of the gluteal muscles. We need to use much more flexion and hip joint. In the same time, we make sure there is good stability of the abdominals with the pelvic muscles. And one more time, rotation and lifting on the knee. And lifting all the way up, almost towards the quadruped. One more. If we need to get there more lengthening and stretching, we can modify the position of the knee. So when the flexion is about 90 degrees, there is more stretch of the whole ITB as far as the gluteal muscles. And let's sit back. Well done. Following exercise, we will combine the stability of the hip, knee and foot in the same time. So we will work on a stance phase in a running cycle. Please, Natalie, stand on your left leg, left foot. Slightly bend your knee. The knee is bended as far as is above the tip toes. The other leg is in extension. The pelvis and rib cage is aligned, so again we can visualize the par line of the diaphragm and pelvic floor. We also focus on even loading of the foot, so the medial part of the foot and lateral part is equally loaded. We need to have nicely spread the transverse arch. We will do it this way, so we cue the client to lift your toes, extend and abduct your toes and land them down. So then the transverse arch is nicely lifted, and we seek for equal loading again in between forefoot and rear foot. In such a position, now the longitudinal arch also is nicely elevated and ready for absorption of the impact. Now the bended knee is aligned with the second toe. We can cue the athlete to place the hand on the side of the knee to have slightly activity of the knee into and the femur into external rotation. Pelvis is horizontal. And now with the extended leg, we have a heel in the same line with the hip joint, and we cue the patient rotation of the hip joint pelvis around the femur. And the same rotation, and now this is important, the rotation of the pelvis and the chest in the same time, activating that part of the muscle is very crucial for runners in eccentric regime. We have nicely lengthening eccentric activity of the hamstring, which is again same as using for running cycle, and we repeat it with rotation upwards and again rotation downwards, eccentric regime of all the muscles as far as the foot. Again, the number of repetitions depend on the capacity of the muscles to work eccentrically, and the speed, it very depends on ability of the client to control the motion and keep the quality. Very good, well done, thank you. Following exercise we can use for runners who are suffering from Achilles pain, overloading of the calf muscles or plantar fasciitis. In such a runner, we frequently see they using too much power from gastrocnemius and calf muscles in order to push off during running cycle. And we would like to diminish this activity of gastrocnemius and use this push-off via momentum or center of mass. So Natalie, please stand in front of the wall. We start from lunge in order to activate the gluteal muscles, co-activity of the quads, VMO and hamstrings, and then initiate the push-off phase. We're starting from a split squat from lunge when the knee is above the tip of the toes, with the trunk slightly more leaning forward, so we activate the glutes, quad and hamstrings. Now Natalie, please raise your arm forward. And we moving from the split squat up to standing. Then the other leg is moving and swinging forward as far as 90 degrees in a hip joint. When the center of mass and pelvis is in front of the foot, trunk is slightly lean forward. And this is the time when we push off and moving into floating phase. And we repeat it one more time, please. Split squat, very nice, leaning forward. And now the motion upward, so femur is moving on the shin, pelvis moving forward, center of mass, hip is moving towards the 90 degrees of flexion. We have trunk lean forward. As we have a pelvis in front of the foot, now there is the place for heel, push off slightly, and the body is still moving forward. And repeat one more time. So initially we doing the exercise very slow for awareness, for feeling and experience the motion in phases, and eventually we can again increase the speed, make it a bit faster. So very nice, and you go back. Well done. Following exercise is called high kneeling, and we will use it for our runner in order to have better coordination between gluteal muscles, adductors in uprighting function. So I ask Natalie to kneel down. We're starting in a position kneeling on both knees. Knees are shoulder width with the convergence of the shins. We're starting in a vertical line when the knees, hips and shoulders are aligned. Then we ask our client to step one leg forward in a slight abduction external rotation. So this position is called half high kneeling. And from this position we will activate these gluteal muscles and with co-activity of the adductors and quad. Initially we make sure we have zero flexion, so we have neutral position in a hip joint. And then we continue to move the whole body backwards, like sitting back and slightly sideways with also hip joint rotation. We're activating gluteal muscles, outer rotators, co-activates adductors and quad muscles. And we repeat it, so that's the one phase of sitting back pose from high kneeling. We can continue make it more demanding, even lower, but in this case we need to bring the other leg into extension, so it's not restricting the motion. The leg might be without any contact, or it might be resting on the floor. And from this position, from maximum flexion, again we cue the client to lift up towards the knee and place the leg back to the initial position. Well done.